Hello, and thank you for joining us for our second panel today on hydrogen. Joining us for this discussion is Jürgen Henningsen, Senior Advisor for the European Policy Centre, Stefan Herbst, Technical General Manager for R&D at Toyota Motor Europe, Emmanuel Cacaras, Senior Vice President, Head of New Products and Energy Solutions at Mitsubishi Power Europe, and Thierry Leperc, Chief Executive of Soladvent. Thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. Emmanuel, I'm going to start with you because we spoke about hydrogen at the last FT Energy Transition Strategy Summit when we could actually meet in person about 18 months ago. I was hoping that we could talk first of all about what's changed in those 18 months. There was a lot of interest in hydrogen then, but it really feels as though things have moved forward a step even further.
Yeah, thanks for remembering me, Natalie, and thanks for reminding me what I have said 18 months ago. At that time, it was at the wake of the ambitious announcement of the UK government to go carbon neutral. And I said at that time that we need hydrogen to get carbon neutral. But unfortunately, to the best of my knowledge, hydrogen has not a business case. So my criterion for change is exactly to see what has come into place to facilitate the carbon-free hydrogen business case. And I think one game changer, on top of the COVID-19, of course, is the communication of the European policymakers on the hydrogen strategy, this relation to the Green Recovery Funds. Things are getting better moving forward, but still my takeaway is that we have steps to go to facilitate investments for the first mover projects full scale on carbon-free hydrogen. Yes, things have changing, more to come.
Right, okay, steps to go until we can facilitate investment. Jürgen, I'm going to move to you because Emmanuel mentioned there the European hydrogen strategy, which is very much focused on green hydrogen. I mean, in your view, is that the right strategy? Is that the way Europe should be going?
Well, in my opinion, it's not as clever a strategy as the European Commission tried to paint it. And my reason for being somewhat skeptical is that whatever use of hydrogen you can imagine coming from green electricity implies that you will more or less lose half of your green electricity in the process of first converting the green electricity into hydrogen, and then subsequently whether you convert it back into electricity or whether you use it in a heavy-duty vehicle means that the amount of energy you end up getting out of it is rarely more than half, and in some cases, if you talk about maritime or fuel, it'll rather be a loss of close to 2/3 of the energy in the green electricity. I don't think that the EU can afford to lose so much green electricity in a situation where it is very difficult to see how the EU can produce and provide sufficient green electricity in the next 10 to 15 years. First, to substitute the black electricity, first coal, of course, but also natural gas. And secondly, to provide electricity for all these uses that will be necessary electrification targets. Of course, transport is one of them, but domestic heating is another one. So from a climate point of view, we would be much better off if we use our green electricity as such for these purposes, rather than losing half of it or more in a conversion to hydrogen and then further conversions or use of the hydrogen.
That's interesting. So presumably you're therefore more of an advocate of blue hydrogen then?
Well, if we are to go to use hydrogen, and there might be some scope for that. I mean, there are some big projects. Germany wants to buy hydrogen from Morocco, and Japan wants to buy hydrogen from Australia. And of course, blue hydrogen is not as good as green hydrogen, because there will be some losses of CO2 in the production of it. But I would say that if you compare the two and keep your green electricity for the purposes where it gives the maximum CO2 emission reductions, it's much better to accept the smaller CO2 emissions from the blue hydrogen than to give away the much bigger CO2 emission reductions from the green electricity.
Thierry, I'm sure, I'm hoping that you can pick up on that actually, around green hydrogen. We simply don't have enough green electricity. Perhaps we should be using it in a wiser way than pursuing green hydrogen.
No, honestly, that's nonsense. You have today 220 gigawatts of solar projects in Spain. 220 gigawatts of solar projects that have requested transmission to the power grid. You know what portion of that is likely to get a connection to the power grid? Not even 5%. So you have 200 gigawatts standing today as we speak, just ready to do what? Hydrogen, period. And my company right now has secured 10 gigawatts. It's not just talk, it's business. In the end, what is changing everything? Policies, and what we've heard and what we'll probably likely hear again from Vice President Timmermans in an hour or so, is that the cornerstone of the decarbonization of industry and the whole economy of Europe is right now green hydrogen. That's the fact. That is what has been announced. Now, political announcements are one thing. What you want to have at the same time is industry moving in. And what you have today is the whole industry moving from upstream to midstream to downstream, starting from solar development and gigafactories of electrolyzers. Gigafactories, keep that thing in. We need gigafactories, and they're coming. You know, we have companies that are doing it. The midstream side, transmitting power, gas. We're talking about hydrogen using natural gas transmission and storage. That's the European Hydrogen Backbone Project, huge project involving 15 gas TSOs across Europe. And we have now off-takers moving in. Off-takers in chemicals, steel, energy, cement, refining, all of them want the product. So it's a market which is being born. And now we have a combination of policymaking with extremely clear goals of 10 million tons for the European Commission by 2030. That's very clear. And it's green hydrogen, not blue, green. And then what we have is industry moving in at a very large scale. Last but not least, we have finance moving in as well. So this is a total game changer. What has happened in the last 18 months, you were saying, I would say the last 6 months, is an absolute revolution. It's a tipping point.
Right. Before we go into the sort of finer details of the green versus blue hydrogen debate, I wanted to ask you, Stefan, because hydrogen's being touted as a solution to so many difficult problems as countries try to get to net zero targets. In our last session with Graham Cooley of ITM Power, an electrolyzer manufacturer, he thought that the initial case for hydrogen is really around replacing grey hydrogen currently produced from fossil fuels in industry. But obviously Toyota has been pursuing hydrogen for a very long time now. And obviously you believe in hydrogen for transport. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you've seen things change in recent years and how you see this really playing out, the hydrogen debate, over the next sort of 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. First, let me add to the discussion that we just started. We believe that electricity should be used directly as much as possible because it is the most efficient way, and we agree to this. However, having said that, there are certain limitations. In transport, you cannot decarbonize transport by pure electrification for a number of reasons. Some is space related. If you look at, for example, the city of Brussels and the roads, I don't know how you want to charge all these vehicles. Second is grid related. That needs to be changed. The third is transport related. It was mentioned you can produce electricity very cheap in Spain, in Portugal. but how to transport it across Europe, we believe it is very efficient actually to utilize hydrogen, to produce hydrogen. And hydrogen can easily be stored, it can be transported to anywhere. And that is a big advantage. And just also take the, for example, the gas grid in Germany, actually, which has a storage function as well. Today, it stores 220 terawatt hours of gas. And we need, as an economy, an energy carrier that has the storage function to absorb supply and demand shocks. So hydrogen has a crucial role to play if we want to replace fossil fuels. And electricity does not deliver this function. Now, looking at transport, I mentioned space, but also we have certain power requirement of certain vehicles. As I mentioned, some smaller vehicles, short distance drive can be covered with pure electric vehicles. But when it comes really to long distance drive, to heavy user like taxis, to bigger cars, vans, buses, trucks, batteries are not enough. If you would equip today a truck that can drive up to 500, 600, 700 kilometers, the truck would only transport batteries. So for these applications, hydrogen makes much more sense, because what are the limiting factors that we have? And a truck is very similar to passenger cars. The space is limited on where you can store energy. Today we have diesel tanks. As I mentioned, batteries have a lower density, so you need to use almost all the space and weight on a truck to equip it with batteries. So with hydrogen, we can be much more compact, and we can, at 700 bar or even liquid, then reach driving distance of 800 to 1,000 kilometers for trucks. So for certain applications also, hydrogen makes more sense than pure battery electric.
Right. So if you think that electricity, green electricity should be used directly because that's the most efficient way, are you also, supportive of pursuing both green and blue hydrogen then?
Yeah, let me take
that is a good
sorry.
question, and I think at the end it is also the customer and it is policymakers who decide. It's the customer who said, I want the cheapest source, and it's at the end, it's countries also who say, I have a certain, for energy security preference for one or the other energy source. And it is a question at the end how we can achieve the Paris Agreement targets. What we also can see is that green hydrogen actually becomes quite competitive in the coming years. We saw that photovoltaic cost dropped of 80%, and in the recent study of the Hydrogen Council that we have published, we see actually a similar cost decrease also for hydrogen, for electrolyzer and hydrogen applications. So we believe that green and also blue hydrogen will become cheaper. And that means for transport, and that's also what we have shown, by 2030 or even before 2030, we can realize actually a TCO competitive option for trucks, for buses, for vans, also for taxis that can compete with conventional fossil fuel options today.
Emmanuel, you wanted to come in there?
Yes, yeah. I think I wouldn't buy into this debate between green and blue, because it's not a debate. First of all, the value of green hydrogen is the value of electricity storage. So there is no discussion about reconversion or thermodynamics or whatsoever. It's how you value electricity storage. And this presumes that you have maximized the production of electricity, which is not the case in Europe still. You have maximized the end use. You have done everything on demand side management, and then you need to store. And if you need to store electricity, it's beyond any doubt that green hydrogen is the most efficient way to store electricity and then use it somewhere else whatsoever. One point. Second point, we have seen cheap electricity prices in the past. Hydrogen has been discussed as an energy carrier in the past in the nuclear era. Electricity was cheaper there. Why didn't it happen in the early 2000s? Because the decarbonization need was not there. Therefore, the second point is you need decarbonization. So this is how hydrogen does a comeback, because we need to store green electricity, we need to decarbonize, and because we need to decarbonize, we need big quantities. Therefore, carbon-free hydrogen, that means blue hydrogen, which is produced earlier and at a bigger scale, will make the way in to facilitate the entrance of the green hydrogen. So there is no rivalry between the two. And at the end of the day, hydrogen will be commoditized. It will be produced wherever it's most cost competitive to be produced. There are global projects, very matured. We have the first delivery of carbon-free ammonia from Saudi Arabia to Japan, for example, already paving the way of commoditization. Therefore, at the end, we will have a carbon-free society because we have decided to do so. And these are bits and pieces that are put together to the ultimate goal. That's my point. So I don't see the rivalry between green and blue. I don't see the rivalry between green electricity or green hydrogen. It's one target, decarbonization, and of course, energy affordability for everybody in this globe, not just the Europeans.
Can I ask? Is blue hydrogen really carbon free though? Are there not still some emissions of CO2?
It's 5. Let's say that it carries a 5% CO2 emission in comparison to the conventional gray hydrogen coming from reforming. So at the end of the day, it carries, if we do, and the Commission has put this RED II, and we do all the numbers and the carbon footprint, there will be a residual CO2 footprint, which is, depending on the technology, if we calculate also transport from one place to another and so on, it might be 5%. It's well below what it is today. So there is no comparison to the specific CO2 emission from gas. There is no comparison to the gas liquids discussion, methane emission, and so on. So for me, not only for me, for everybody doing the maths, is a carbon efficient way to have first steam reforming and carbon capture, and then bring to the economy the large quantities that will create the infrastructure, and in fact, they will create the demand for green hydrogen. Nothing bad about that.
Thierry, do you think there ought to be a dual track pursuing both green and blue, or do you think that the debate, that there is no debate? There are some renewable groups, for example, who believe that no public subsidy should go towards blue hydrogen projects.
I believe in markets. At one point, the market decides. Politicians can say the market decides. What we have today, we're right now with my company, we are structuring contracts, offtake contracts in hundreds of thousands of tons with a variety of off-takers. There's one number, just one number that everyone has to have in mind. It's 1.5 euro per kilogram delivered. If you want to sell to ammonia producers, if you want to sell to cement makers, if you want to sell to steel makers, if you want to sell to power and heat generators, 1.5 is your price. Now, 1.5 is also the price of gray hydrogen. And the problem is that if you add another layer and actually it's closer to 2 euros in Europe. Now, if you add the CCS layer, you're not in business. So by definition, there is no market for it because customers will not pay the product. And you could say, hey, subsidies are going to step in, trillions of subsidies for fossil fuel. That's not going to happen. So for me, there is absolutely no discussion, no debate. The market makes the decision. Now, the only question that everybody has in their mind is, can green hydrogen foot the bill? Can green hydrogen delivered for delivered cost of hydrogen at 1.5 euro a kilogram? And we have an answer to that with a consortium of companies that we're bringing together? The answer is yes, as early as 2025.
Would anyone like to come back on that point, that the market will ultimately back green hydrogen because it'll prove to be cheaper? Yes, please go ahead.
The market, oh, sorry.
Sorry, Jürgen.
Oh, okay. I think that one has distinguished between two, the cost and the price of the green electricity. Because as long as the green electricity will be something which is in demand, in shortage, the price of the green electricity will be related to the price of electricity in the European market, which is now liberalized. And the price at this point in time is mainly set by the producers, electricity producers from natural gas. Now, none of us know what will be the price or the cost of natural gas in the future. But the value of the green electricity, whether from a climate point of view or whether from a market point of view, is most likely to be significantly higher than what will allow the production of hydrogen for 1.5 euros per kilogram. I think there are still a number of birds on the roof in this discussion. And let me just stress that I'm not against hydrogen as such. I'm just saying that in a situation where there is a huge demand for green electricity, not just to make electricity production green, but also for electrification of domestic heating and transport, that it's not a good idea to turn valuable, climate-wise valuable green electricity into hydrogen with the losses. Now, there may be cases where you have what I would call stranded solar energy. I know there will be, of course, in Northern Africa. There may be some in Spain and Portugal. But the same discussion goes on around the North Sea. And I don't think it's an argument that hydrogen can be transported. So can electricity. There's an export of electricity from Norway to the Netherlands, which is highly profitable. So I can't see that you couldn't export what is called excess green electricity from the southeastern corner of the North Sea, for instance, to North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany, which will have big, big problems in providing green energy for their electricity, for their industry, for their transportation. And there are huge parts of Europe that will have very mediocre conditions for producing green electricity. A lot of Central and Eastern Europe, they have neither the solar power of Spain nor the wind power of Denmark or northwestern Germany. So let me not try to argue that there can't be pockets where it would make sense to turn excess, for instance, solar energy into hydrogen. But that is very, very far from making hydrogen sort of a general important energy carrier on the basis of green electricity. Maybe in 15 years' time, the situation will have changed.
We have customers today. I mean, we're talking about a market today. We have customers today. So it's not a forecast. It's not a consulting thing. It is a business thing. 1.5, we're ready to produce it at 1.5, and we have today over 1 million tons of off-takers ready to buy it. It's a market-driven thing. At one point, we have to listen to the markets. Sorry for this intervention.
Oh, please go ahead. I saw a few other heads being shaken there. Anyone else like to come in? Emmanuel?
Yep. Yes, it's another. We are all for markets, and I'm representing the industry here. And the industry has taken the commitment to give the enabling technologies for the hydrogen use across the board, from generation, from production, to transmission, to end use. And the company I am working with is putting both alternatives into perspective. We have, for instance, CCGT plants running on hydrogen turbines. We have CCGT plants running on end-of-pipe CCS. So it's the market which is going to decide, that not our preference. And please be reminded that hydrogen will be commoditized. There are so many initiatives right now around the globe. If we look in the initiatives about green or zero carbon maritime, if we look into initiatives on aviation, so there is a market on green or carbon-free fuels. And that is a signal that I agree with Thierry we cannot neglect, and the industry has taken the part. On the other hand, we have to distinguish between costs and prices. So costs are simple to calculate. We have been a company being globally active on looking on green fuels because we think that green fuels, zero carbon fuels and decarbonization is the pillar for the development of our company. The second one in a global context being artificial intelligence. So yes, we put our energy, we put our know-how, we put our capabilities to make it happen. And this is the big change across the last 18 months, where now we see commitment from the industry to move forward. And this is also something that we have to acknowledge.
You mentioned right at the start there, Manuel, around, you still had doubts. I mean, you previously said that there currently wasn't, 18 months ago, you said there was no market for hydrogen, and you did express at the start some
business.
Sorry, so yes, is there a business market? You did express some concern around whether, there is still kind of a strong investment case. From the industry's point of view, how are they incentivized to switch to hydrogen and greener solutions? Does it require large state subsidies, or what are the mechanisms from the industry point of view?
I think that there is a cost gap. I'd love to see the numbers that Thierry is putting together. I'd love to, because it will be with equipment somehow. So we have to put the equipment there to deliver this cost structure. To my knowledge, talking with project developers around the globe, there is always a cost gap, which is getting significantly smaller and smaller with the course of time. But there is a cost gap if I compare hydrogen with the alternative source of energy. And which is the alternative source of energy? Is gas plus CO2 cost. So whether there will be a massive increase on CO2 prices, which I doubt, or whether there will be contracts for difference or a kind of subsidy in this CO2 avoidance cost on hydrogen, there is a cost gap, and this is a clear sign, and I think it is important to give the correct signal to the politicians, because if we say the market is jumping already around the cost competitiveness of hydrogen, this is the wrong signal. There is a cost gap, and this gap will get smaller and smaller with time, but nowadays, today, has to be bridged. And we have to put the policies there to bridge this gap in a market-conform way.
And what sort of policies ideally help to bridge that cost gap?
I'm not a policy maker. I'm building power plants and electrolyzers and gas turbines. So I'm not a policy maker, but I think if you look in the actual avoidance cost of CO2, this is a pretty good metric to see how you can come with a CFD form or with a different allocation of carbon credits, for instance, in the industries that are taking the bold steps to introduce carbon-free fuels for their production structure. This is the way that we will take the next step towards the complete decarbonization.
We're getting a lot of questions in, so before I move on to a kind of Q&A session, there are those out there who believe that this is just another hype bubble, that hydrogen may have very niche roles, but there are limitations to what extent it will replace fossil fuel usage in the global economy. Are there constraints around the properties of hydrogen? I'm told it's less calorific than natural gas, so it might not be suitable for all applications. I mean, is there a chance that, amongst this interest and companies pursuing it, that perhaps we are overplaying the global role of hydrogen?
If I may answer, the key question is answering to what Emmanuel was saying is this 1.5 credible or not? And I'll give you going to give you how it's made. We are targeting by 2025 solar power at around 12 euros per megawatt hour, which is roughly what the level of tenders that have been allocated in Portugal in the Middle East. So it's I'd say solar is the easy part. By the way, that was my business first, and I reduced the cost of solar power in 15 countries, 3 gigawatts by 95%. I know how to do it. Second thing is electrolyzers. We're moving right now with those gigafactories to move the overall cost of electrolyzers from, say, around 1,000 euros per kilowatt to 300 by 2025. How do you get there? Bigger stacks, optimization of the value chain, improvement of the EPC contracts. I could get you exactly into all the details. Now, if you put all these two things together, you get to the 1.2 produced, and then you need to move the product through gas transmission, which is extremely, by the way, gas transmission is 10 times cheaper than power transmission. It makes so much more sense to move a molecule than to move an electron. And by the way, if it was easy to move electrons, Germany would have moved wind electrons from northern Germany to southern Germany, which they're desperately trying to do and have not been able to do. So what we have today is the capacity with the gas TSOs. We're working right now with all the gas TSOs from southwestern Europe to do that, to use their gas piping systems and their underground storage capacities. We're talking about the equivalent of millions of batteries, which are readily available right now in salt caverns and aquifers. And all of this is ready to be implemented in 2025. And by the way, we're working on a project which is right now discussing with Mitsubishi on the supply of gas turbines for 800 megawatt hydrogen-fired plant. It's called Lac Hydrogen 2026, southwestern France. It's moving in. For real. And we hope maybe to supply the trucks by Toyota. I'm a strong believer in trucks. I saw the Toyota fuel cell truck in Sacramento a year ago, and I'm not a truck person, but I fell in love with a truck. So please build them, and thousands of them, please, quickly, and we'll bring our cheap hydrogen to match that.
I have seen forecasts, though, that if you look at what proportion of fossil fuel energy use will be replaced by electrification and hydrogen, that hydrogen, yes, it has a sort of a notable contribution, but still it's limited. I mean, I'll go back to asking, is there a danger that we are overplaying this, that the role will be sizable, but it won't be the answer to every decarbonisation problem?
Natalie, let me take that because I would like to have the next topic after another 18 months when we meet hopefully again. So my point here is not about hydrogen. It's not about the choice of hydrogen. My point is the choice of the society to do decarbonization. If our society stands firm on their choice to achieve a full decarbonization by 2050, or in some member states even earlier, then there is no other alternative than hydrogen. That's a clear message from my side. And we will be here next time to discuss about that, hopefully.
Jürgen, would you agree with that?
Sorry, yes, for mobility, is hydrogen the only solution? No. Is electricity the only solution? No. We need both. And I think that is the message. You will not find one energy carrier that can completely decarbonize. We need multiple solutions to do this.
Jürgen, I don't know if you yourself have any forecasts for what proportion of fossil fuel use will be replaced by electrification, and what about hydrogen? You mentioned that you did see some potential uses for hydrogen, but I take it that you really think it'll be replaced by electrification. Is that right?
Yeah, there might be some purpose in using hydrogen in steel production. At least there you will only have the energy loss, which is reflected in the production of hydrogen, but not in the subsequent upgrading or whatever it is that can go indirectly. I think that one thing that could be very promising is if it is correct that maritime transport would move towards ammonia, because that would allow us to produce ammonia from hydrogen from stranded solar electricity or solar power around the world. So I'm definitely not against hydrogen. All I'm saying is that hydrogen, green hydrogen, should not be used in areas where there's a possibility to use the green electricity directly. And I think this also applies to a vast number of heavy-duty vehicles. It is true that electricity is not an ideal fuel for lorries that go 600, 700, 800 kilometers a day. But there are millions of heavy-duty vehicles and delivery vans and others who could easily be transformed or could be turned into electricity directly. And actually, I learned the other day that Volvo is now launching a lorry which will have an autonomy of 300 kilometers. At least in my country, there are lots of heavy-duty vehicles that never go beyond 300 kilometers a day. And they even have this big advantage that they can be recharged at the same place all the time because they're normally spent in the night in the same place. And I think the same is true in many European countries. So I would not draw such a sharp line between heavy-duty vehicles and passenger cars.
Perhaps I'm going to go to some questions that have come in from listeners, and this is probably one for you, Jürgen. Some of the speakers are rightly concerned about the possibility that renewables may not be able to provide sufficient green electricity to produce enough green hydrogen. But this ignores the possibility that nuclear power, which is also green, will have to supply the difference. Do you think that's a fair point, that actually this isn't just about producing hydrogen from offshore, onshore wind and solar? The nuclear has a role here as well.
Well, I don't see any major role for nuclear within Europe. I mean, we have seen most of the member states and the bigger ones either decline or phasing out nuclear prematurely. And there may be some of the countries among the new member states and Finland and others who are more hooked on nuclear. And of course, in this context where we are discussing hydrogen, there's no difference between electricity that comes from a nuclear power plant or from a wind turbine. They're both, by and large, I would say, CO2 free. So I have no religion about this. I don't have any religion either about whether blue hydrogen is bad because it allows more use of fossil fuels. I just try to see now how do we get the most CO2 reductions out of the green electricity that we will have available for the next 10 to 15 years. Let me say, it may well be that after 10 or 15 years, the situation will be different, and we will have much more green electricity than we expect today to have for the EU or for Europe in the period that I find is particularly important, namely up to 2030. If you look at what is necessary for respecting the 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees centigrade, there will be a need for a global reduction in emissions of something like 50% by 2030. That doesn't allow us to waste good green electricity in a way where it could be used with a bigger CO2 emission reduction potential in that period.
If I may add, I'm come from a country that is nuclear, where nuclear is a religion, and it is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Producing hydrogen from nuclear, it's 10 euros per kilogram. Right now, EDF and its subsidiaries are selling hydrogen at 10 euros per kilogram, and it's unlikely that the price is going to go down. Actually, we see the price of nuclear going up. So there's a ratio of 1 to 6. Can you imagine that? 1 to 6. This is honestly the most ridiculous statement I've ever heard, that you could do a nuclear hydrogen. It doesn't add up. I mean, look at the numbers. 10 euros on one side, 1.5 what the customer wants. Who is going to pay the 8.5 euros in subsidies that is going to cost trillions of subsidies if we want to go there? Honestly, at one point, people have to look at, calculate things and look and say 10 euros on one side, 1.5 on the other side. It is ridiculous. Let's stop talking about this. And I say that as a Frenchman.
Jürgen, I saw you put your hand up there, but you have something to add before I brace myself for the letters from EDF.
No, I don't think that nuclear has any particular future within the EU. It may have in other parts of the world. I'm not going to provide an analysis of that, but I don't think it's worth discussing, except to say that whatever is the source of the hydrogen, the source of the hydrogen, or whatever sort of electricity, electricity coming from nuclear power in those countries that have that is also contributing to keeping down CO2 emissions. It may well be true that electricity from nuclear is so much more expensive. That's actually one of the good reasons why we're not going to have much nuclear. So I don't see the issue of nuclear as hardly worthwhile discussing.
I shall, yes, I shall definitely brace myself for some comeback from EDF at some point. Another question from a listener here: how do you see decentralized hydrogen generation from local biomass or municipal mixed waste supporting e-mobility? Is that a possibility, producing hydrogen from local biomass or municipal waste plants?
This is a question for me.
Yeah.
Stefan, shall I go with you first?
Yeah, I can. So what we see, especially with the buses, with our fuel cell bus, with project with Caetano, that we have more and more cities and municipalities actually who want to produce the hydrogen that they consume in their bus fleet by themselves. And indeed, they are more and more cities and municipalities are using waste to produce hydrogen.
Okay, Emmanuel, did you also want to make a point there?
I think from the alternative paths that we have to produce green hydrogen, the decentralized use of biomass is the most remote one in terms of business case acceptance. I think that there are other things to do with biomass that are preferable than try to enter into multiple stages in the upstream conversion to hydrogen. Having said that, I definitely think for both biomass and waste utilization, getting rid of the CO2 that's produced in both from both streams is by far more important than definitely make it hydrogen. There are niche markets for that, but it will not be a mainstream, that's for sure. Biomass and waste, we will go there to cover the heating needs, and this has to be done in the heating market for district heating plants or whatsoever. It can be done with CCS and fully decarbonized. And if we have excessive supply of energy streams, then we can discuss about hydrogen or other. We have all this discussion on biogas and the upgrade of biogas in carbon-free methane. Everything, as I told you, as we move towards deep decarbonization, everything will take its position in this puzzle of technologies. But let's take first thing first, low-hanging fruits first. Cases like the cases we are witnessing in the US, for instance, where we have already made big announcements in our Magnum projects on underground hydrogen storage, on reconverting hydrogen to power as a mean of energy storage. So take one at a time, and at the end, the goal is decarbonization. Shallow or deep decarbonization, this is what we are all aiming.
We have a question specific for Thierry here. You say that gas transmission is 10 times cheaper than power transmission. Does this account for the modifications needed for natural gas pipelines relating to hydrogen embrittlement? So does that take account for the changes you might need to make to natural gas pipelines, to carry hydrogen? Because, there are concerns over whether, current natural gas infrastructure is appropriate to transport hydrogen.
I invite every single one of our viewers to download the European Hydrogen Backbone presentation. It's 100 pages. It's been written by the TSOs themselves. So it's not consultants, it's the TSOs themselves. 23,000 kilometers from Spain to Sweden, and now including National Grid from the UK and the Poles as well. It's bringing everyone under the same roof. And the message that the report lays out is very clear. We're going to use existing infrastructure, existing pipes, and convert them, and we're going to build new ones next to them where it's not practically possible. The amount of investment needed will be so small that in the end, the cost of transmitting power, hydrogen, and then I'm quoting, so it's not my invention, it is the TSO themselves who are saying it, is between 9 and 17 euro cents per kilogram per 1,000 kilometers. So that is now, if you look at the transmission cost of power, you will be in that range. So what we have today is the TSOs themselves, and this has to be heard. We have the natural gas infrastructure people from around Europe who have gathered into a very powerful initiative that have to be heard. And by the way, it's very well heard at the European Commission. I'm very happy to say that. It has to be heard by other industry players that this is going to be there very quickly. Be ready for it. If you want to produce hydrogen, you're going to move your product into that European hydrogen backbone. If you want to use the product, you're going to you're going to be at the receiving end of that. So this is a game changer. This is about infrastructure. How did we build natural gas and oil in the last 50 or 100 years? Through infrastructure, midstream infrastructure on transmission and storage is coming. And then again, let's listen to the professionals, to the guys who own those infrastructures, to the regulators. They're sending a very, very clear message today.
It's a shame we don't have anyone from a transmission system operator here today to talk about problems of potential embrittlement. But yes, next time. A question here about offshore wind. Is green hydrogen a feasible solution for offshore wind with both so much surrounding water and grid connectivity challenges? Would anyone like to have a go at that one?
I can take quite easily that one, since we are teaming up with Vestas in the offshore wind business. I think yes, because and we have now been looking into projects on offshore hydrogen production as well, to go a step further. And this offshore hydrogen production will first be used to effectively decarbonize, for instance, platforms on remote areas, and then you can have gas infrastructure coming in. And so yes, it's one of the alternatives. We need to do a bit more of homework, because if you put equipment offshore, it's not like putting it onshore in terms of protection, of corrosion resistance, and so on. But yes, we think that hydrogen is the alternative to make offshore wind really not competitive, because it is, but to further promote the deployment of offshore wind technologies.
Just one very last one before we have to unfortunately wrap up this session, but will water become a problem in green hydrogen production?
This is honestly one of the ridiculous ideas that are floating around. If you want to see the energy content of water, think that in 1 liter of water, you have nearly half a liter of gasoline. Now imagine the ocean, because you can desalinate it, and that's for the desert. But even a small stream in southern Spain will be far enough to produce. So there again, we ridiculously underestimate the content, the energy content of a molecule of H2O. This is one of the, I'd say, fake news about hydrogen. There are many others, by the way, which is saying we're going to run out of water, we're going to run out of this or out of that. This is endless. The source is endless. And the great news about hydrogen is really using endless sources of things: the sun, solar irradiation, polysilicon, steel, because we need steel to do electrolyzers. Not that much, but we do need steel, and then some water, and to turn that into something where we can do hundreds of times what we need in terms of fossil fuels. So the resource is there. We just need to make it happen.
Lovely. Well, hopefully we didn't spread any fake news today. I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap it up. We could talk about hydrogen for a very long time. I hope we get to talk about it again at the next FT Energy Transition Strategy Summit. Thanks to everyone for their time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, Natalie. See you again. Hope to see you again very soon. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.